I would like to welcome you all, and I would like to thank TİHEK. We have a good relation between Turkey and Azerbaijan. And we also would like to thank our sister country, Turkey, in all our international conflicts. And Turkey-Azerbaijan friendship is eternal. And this friendship will be more deepened every day. And our bonds and our bonds actually is eternal and quite strong. So long live our friendship between Turkey and Azerbaijan. So Karabakh is the inevitable part of Azerbaijan, and Azerbaijan tried to invite Armenia to solve the conflict with peace. However, it was not possible to do so. Esteemed participants, as the speaker doesn't speak in Turkish, yet in Azerbaijan language, we are unable to provide English translation. Thank you very much for your understanding.
Qiymət verilməmişdir. Ombudsman hər zaman ekoloji terrora qarşı mübarizədə qeyri-hökumət təşkilatları ilə sıx əməkdaşlıq etmiş və birlikdə bəyanatlar hazırlayaraq beynəlxalq qurumların diqqətinə çatdırmışdır. Qeyri-hökumət təşkilatlarına Dövlət Agentliyinin təşkilatçılığı ilə erməni faşizminin işğalından azad edilmiş Qarabağ ərazilərinə qeyri-hökumət təşkilatlarının dəfələrlə səfərləri təşkil edilmişdir. Qeyri-hökumət təşkilatları Ermənistan Qarabağ ərazisində törətdiyi vəhşiliyi, ekologiya vurduğu ziyanı, ağaçların kütləvi məhvini, çayların çirkləndirilməsini öz gözləri ilə görərək dəfələrlə birlikdə bəyanatlar imzalayaraq beynəlxalq qurumlara göndərmişdir. Qeyd etmək istərdim ki, Azərbaycan ərazilərində qeyri-qanuni məskunlaşmış ermənilər yaşadıkları yerləri tərk edərək ətraf ərazilərdə ekoloji terrorlar törətdilər. Belə ki, onlar o yerləri tərk edən zaman meşələri və evləri yandıraraq ətraf mühitə qəsdən zərər vurdular. Ermənistan vandalları tərəfindən azad edilmiş ərazilərə bastırılmış minalarla bağlı xəritələrin bu günə qədər isə Azərbaycana təqdim edilməməsi, qaçqın və köçkünlərin öz doğma torpaqlarına təhlükəsiz qaydasının həyata keçirilməsinə ciddi maneələr yaradır. Bütün bunlara baxmayaraq, Azərbaycan Respublikası Prezidenti cənab İlham Əliyevin və Türkiyə Cumhurbaşqanı Sayın Rəcəb Tayyib Ərdoğanın qardaşlığı sayəsində Qarabağ yenidən bərpa olaraq dünyanın ən gözəl bir məkanı olacaq. Qarabağ Azərbaycandır. Biz hesab edirik ki, iqlim dəyişmələrinə qarşı mübarizədə bütün ölkələrin fəal iştirakı olmalıdır. Təəssüflə qeyd etmək istərdik ki, iqlim dəyişmələri ilə bağlı ekstremal hava şəraiti, xüsusən daşqınlar planetdə 62 milyon insana bu və ya digər dərəcədə zərər vurur. Araşdırmalarımız göstərir ki, Avropa, Yaponiya və Amerika Birləşmiş Ştatlarında şiddətli isti və meşə yanğınları nəticəsində 1600-dən çox insan həlak olub. Filippini və digər Asiya ölkələrini cənginə almış güclü manqut tayfunu nəticəsində 134 adam həlak olub, 2,4 milyon nəfər zərər çəkib. Bizi narahat edən ekstremal hava şəraitinin faciəli nəticələri getdikcə artmışdır. Misal üçün, son zamanlar təkcə Amerika Birləşmiş Ştatlarında iqlim dəyişmələri ilə əlaqədar 14 təbii fəlakət müşahidə olunub. Bu, iqtisadiyyata milyardlarla dollar ziyan vurub. İtkilərin ümumi həcmi 49 milyard dollara bərabər olub. Dünyada 35 milyondan çox insan daşqınlardan zərər çəkib. Afrikanın cənubundakı İdeya siklonu bunun əyani nümunələrindən biridir. Beynəlxalq mütəxəssislərin hesablamalarına görə 17,7 milyon daxili köçkünün 2 milyonu təbii fəlakətlərdən və ekstremal hava hadisələrindən, daşqınlardan, quraqlıqlardan və fırtınalardan xilas olmaq üçün evlərini tərk etməyə məcbur olur. Təəssüf ki, qlobal istiləşmə və ətraf mühitin çirklənməsi nəticəsində havanın keyfiyyəti pisləşib. Bu, milyonlarla insanın sağlamlığına mənfi təsir göstərir. Bu, əsrin əvvəllərindən bəri şiddətli istilərdən zərər çəkən insanların sayı 125 milyon nəfərə qədər artıb. Bununla bağlı ölüm hallarının sayı da artmaqdadır. Şiddətli isti və çirklənmiş hava çox təhlükəli kombinasiyadır. Xüsusən ona görə ki, rekord istilik dövrləri get-gedə uzanır və daha çox təsadüf olunur. 2017-ci ildə tam dəyərli qidalanmaq imkanı olmayan insanların sayı 821 milyona çatıb. Qlobal istiləşmə ətraf mühitə ciddi dəyişikliklərə səbəb olur. Bu dəyişikliklərin bir qismi qarşısı alınmazdır. Planetin demək olar ki, bütün ekoloji sistemləri, ilk növbədə dənizin ekologiyası zərər çəkib. Su çatışmamazlığı insanları uzaq məsafələrdən su gətirməyə və su ehtiyatlarını evdə saxlamağa vadar edir. Bu isə ev şəraitində suyun çirklənməsi riskini artıraraq xəstəliklərin baş verməsinə səbəb olur. Bizim ölkəmizdə bu problemə xüsusi diqqət verilir. Belə ki, Birləşmiş Millətlər Təşkilatının iqlim dəyişmələri üzrə çərçivə konvensiyası ilə bağlı tərəflərin 21-ci konfransında qəbul olunmuş Paris sazişinin təsdiq edilməsi haqqında 28 oktyabr 2016-cı il tarixli 367 VG nömrəli Azərbaycan Respublikasının qanunu qəbul edildi. Bu saziş fərqli milli şəraitlər nəzərə alınmaqla bərabərlik və ümumi, lakin müxtəlif, diferensial cavabdehlik və müvafiq imkanlar prinsipini əks etdirməklə həyata keçirilməsi nəzərdə tutuldu. Bununla əlaqədar Azərbaycanda ümumi hədəfə çatmaq üçün verdikləri töhfələri fərdi qaydada müəyyənləşdirir və hər 5 ildən bir yenidən nəzərdən keçirilməsi nəzərdə tutulur. Azərbaycan da qlobal iqlim dəyişmələrinin təsirindən kənarda qalmamışdır. Son 100 ildə Azərbaycan ərazisində orta illik temperatur 0,1, 1,3 dərəcə Selsiyə qədər artmışdır. Temperatur artımı regionlardan asılı olaraq qeyri-bərabər paylanır. Son 10 illiklərdə Azərbaycan ərazisində kiçik dağ çaylarında sel və daşqınların sayı və gücü artmışdır. İqlim dəyişikliyi, ərzaq təhlükəsizliyi, davamlı inkişaf və yoxsulluğun azaldılması üçün ciddi maneələr yaradır. 2050-ci ilə qədər dünya əhalisinin 1/3 artacağı proqnozlaşdırılır ki, bu da ən çox inkişaf etməkdə olan ölkələrdə baş verir. Azərbaycanın artan əhalisinin qidalandırmaq, iqtisadi artım və yoxsulluğun azaldılması üçün zəmin yaratmaq məqsədi ilə kənd təsərrüfatı köklü şəkildə transformasiya edilməlidir. Bu problem iqlim dəyişikliyi ilə daha da güclənir. Bununla əlaqədar ölkəmizdə 2 mart 2001-ci il tarixində 640 nömrəli Azərbaycan Respublikasının ərzaq təhlükəsizliyi proqramı qəbul edildi. Ərzaq təhlükəsizliyi insan ləyaqətinin başlıca amili olmaqla əsas insan hüquqlarından biridir. Ona görə də bu hüququn təmin edilməsi Azərbaycan Respublikası hökumətinin mühüm vəzifələrindən sayılır. Ərzaq təhlükəsizliyi hər bir insanın sağlam və məhsuldar həyat tərzi üçün ərzaqla kifayət qədər təmin edilməsi deməkdir. Digər tərəfdən, dünya ərzaq bazarlarında müşahidə olunan qeyri-sabitlik Azərbaycanda da ərzaq məhsullarının qiymətinə öz təsirini göstərir. Mövcud vəziyyət daxili ərzaq bazarının idxaldan asıllığının maksimum azaldılması və ərzaq ehtiyatlarının yaradılması məsələsinə kompleks yanaşma tələb edir. Əgər Azərbaycan müstəqilliyin ilk illərində keyfiyyətə deyil, kəmiyyətə və qiymətə üstünlük verirdisə, hazırda keyfiyyət tərəfi üstünlük təşkil edir. Əhalinin gəlirlərinin artması, həyat səviyyəsinin əvvəlki illərlə müqayisədə yüksəlməsi artıq insanları keyfiyyətli ərzaq məhsullarının tələbatını artırmışdır. Deməli, ərzaq təhlükəsizliyinin Azərbaycan indi elmin inkişafına, yeyinti sənayesində və kənd təsərrüfatında elmi biliklərdən istifadəyə, yeni texnologiyaların mənimsənilməsinə və istifadəsinə xüsusi diqqət yetirməlidir. Qeyd olunan problemlər ərzaq təhlükəsizliyinin təmin edilməsi istiqamətində aşağıdakı tələblər həyata keçirilməsini zəruri hesab edir. Birinci, insan yaşaması üçün ən zəruri ərzaq məhsullarının ölkə daxilində istehsalına, həmin məhsulların ehtiyat fondlarının yaradılmasına nail olmaq. İkinci, ərzaq bazarında texniki, texnoloji, ekoloji və sanitar qaydalara cavab verməyən, aşağı keyfiyyətli və insan orqanizmi üçün təhlükəli olan ərzaq məhsullarının istehsalının və ölkəyə gətirilməsinin qarşısını almaqdır. Lakin etiraf edək ki, hazırda Azərbaycanda bu sahədə problemlər hələ də qalmaqdadır və bu problemin həllində vətəndaş cəmiyyətinin və ictimaiyyətin məsuliyyəti daha vacibdir. Ərzaq məhsullarının istehsalı, emalı və satışı sanitariya-gigiyenik tələblərə cavab verməlidir. Çox vaxt insanlar sanitariya-gigiyenik tələblərə cavab verməyən yerlərdə ərzaq məhsullarının emalını, saxlanmasını, satışını həyata keçirirlər. Bu da kəmiyyət və keyfiyyətcə kifayət qədər bu da son nəticədə insanların sağlamlığına mənfi təsir göstərir. Ərzağın mövcudluğu ölkədə kəmiyyət və keyfiyyətcə kifayət qədər və təhlükəsiz ərzaq məhsullarının mövcud olmasının səciyyələndirir. Mövcudluq adətən milli səviyyədə qiymətləndirilir və ərzaq ehtiyatlarının səviyyəsindən asılı olur. Azərbaycan Respublikasının ərzaq təhlükəsizliyinin əsas təminat məsələləri daxili və xarici amillərdən asılı olmayaraq aşağıdakılardan ibarətdir. Ölkənin hər bir vətəndaşının müəyyən edilmiş rasional istehlak normasına əsasən fəal, sağlam, həyat tərzi üçün lazımi təhlükəsiz və keyfiyyətli yeyinti məhsulları ilə fiziki və iqtisadi cəhətcə təmin edilməsinə nail olması və onun yüksək səviyyədə saxlanmasının təmin edilməsi. Ölkənin ərzaq məhsulları ilə təmin edilməsinə əsas daxili ərzaq növlərinin dayanıqlı istehsalının inkişaf etdirilməsi ilə nail olunması, istehlak edilən yeyinti məhsullarının təhlükəsizliyinə və keyfiyyətinə nail olunması. Qeyd etmək istərdim ki, mövcud yararlı torpaqlardan, o cümlədən əkinə yararlı torpaqlardan səmərəli istifadə edilməsi dünya ölkələrinin əhalisinin ərzaq təhlükəsinin təmin edilməsində milli iqtisadiyyatın rolunun daha da artırılması və beynəlxalq bazardan asıllığının azaldılması vacib məsələlərdən biridir. Dünya ölkələrinin əhalisinin ərzaq təhlükəsinin təmin edilməsi və daha da yaxşılaşdırılması, habelə fövqəladə hallarda və təbii fəlakətlər zamanı ərzaq təhlükəsizliyinin möhkəmləndirilməsi məqsədi ilə dövlət ehtiyatlarının yaradılması zəruri hesab edilir. Bildiyimiz kimi bu istiqamətdə görüləsi işlər hələ də az deyil. Burada qeyd edildiyi kimi, məsələn, kənd təsərrüfatının, kənd yerlərinin daha da inkişaf etdirilməsi ən vacib məsələlərdən biri hesab olunur. Çünki bugün qida təhlükəsizliyinin aradan qaldırılmasının əsas səbəblərdən biri kənd yerlərinin daha da yaxşı inkişaf etdirilməsi məsələsidir. Azərbaycanda artıq ağıllı kənd konsepsiyası həyata keçirilir. Bu da ilk növbədə azad olmuş Zəngilan rayonunda yeni bir kənd konsepsiyasının salınması oldu və bunun nəticəsində də həm qaçqın düşmüş bizim köçkünlərimiz həmin evlərə köçürüldü və orada da həqiqətən çox gözəl və son model kənd şəraiti yaradıldı. Yəni bu bizim bugünkü günü ən vacib məsələlərimizdən biridir ki, kənd yerlərində bütün şəraitlər yaradılsın ki, kənddən şəhərə axınının qarşısı alınsın. Bu yaxınlarda mənim də bununla bağlı belə bir projem var idi. Yeni kənd konsepsiyası adlı bir proje idi. Bizim də orada əsas məqsədimiz kənd yerlərində həddindən artıq deməli ağaclar əkildi. Onlara bununla bağlı çox məlumatlar verildi ki, kənd yerlərinin səliqəli, kənd yerlərində parkların salınması, kənd şəraitinin daha da yaxşılaşdırılması bu günləri həqiqətən Azərbaycan dövlətinin əsas məqsədlərindən biridir. Son olaraq sizə bir şey də çatdırmaq istəyirəm ki, bizim Cənubi Azərbaycanda Urmiya gölünün qurudulması bugün həqiqətən bizləri çox böyük narahat edilir. Orada əsas məqsəd dövlət tərəfindən qəsdən qurudulması, oradakı bizim soydaşlarımızın köçürülməsi deməkdir. Yəni o da həddindən artıq ekologiyaya çox mənfi bir təsir göstərəcək. Çünki Urmiya gölü duzla zəngin bir göldür. O göl əgər qurudularsa, hətta bunu da demək istəyirəm ki, orada nəinki həmin ərazidə yaşayan bizim soydaşlarımıza, hətta belə ondan kənarda, məsələn, Türkiyədə təsir göstərə bilər. Çünki o duz külək nəticəsində həmin duz təbəqələrinin havaya sovrulması oradakı bütün torpaqların məhvi deməkdir. Bizim bu sahədə çox böyük işlərimiz var, monitorinqlər aparırıq. Təşkilatımız bununla bağlı iqlim dəyişkənliyi və qida təhlükəsizliyi ilə bağlı təşkilatımız çoxlu monitorinqlər aparır, layihələr həyata keçirirlər. Diqqətiniz üçün çox sağ olun, təşəkkür edirəm.
Sayın Hasan Ağa'ya biz çok teşekkür ederiz.
We would like to thank the speaker. And now the final speaker, the first Deputy Director of the National Center of the Republic of Uzbekistan for Human Rights, Mr. Mirzatillo Tilabev. And he has more than 150 scientific articles. And moreover, he regulates all those activities related to the human rights and equality, and he worked for the preparation of all those legislative documents. And he is also the national global network responsible for UN Human Rights Institution. And once again, he also worked for the preparation of Declaration of Human Rights and for Islamic Federation. Now I would like to give floor to him.
Let me to congratulate all of you with the coming International Human Rights Day. 74 years ago, international community once again witnessed human rights. His dignity was the first in the global arena. Secondly, in 10 days, we are also celebrate International Day of Migrants. These key issues, one of the key issues today global agenda, and it's great pleasure me to attend this international symposium organized by Human Rights and Equality Institution of Turkey. We have conducted a MOU with the Turkish Institute. During last 3 years, we have organized several events, and I hope our cooperation will continue. It should be noted that the connection between migration and environment and climate change has been increasingly recognized as a key global policy issue over the past decade. And yesterday and today, our speaker says that the new terms, climate change diplomacy, food ethics, food security, will appear in the global agenda also. Climate change and its impacts are one of the great challenges of the day, directly and indirectly impacting on the full enjoyment of human rights, including social, economic, and cultural rights. It's well known that the National Human Rights Institutions have a unique position as a central independent state actors in the promotion of and protection of human rights at national level and as a bridge between the national and international protection of human rights. This makes them essential participants in all of society effort to address the human rights of climate change and climate action. We can say that there are two principal objectives of National Human Rights Institution engagement on climate action. First, to encourage government and business to mitigate greenhouse gas emissions and to adapt and build resilience to the effects of climate change. Second, to ensure that mitigation and the adaptation measures are consistent with the human rights issues. According to the World Bank, by 2050, 260 million people in 6 regions of the world will become climate immigrants. That they will have to leave the territories in which they live under the influence of climate factors and move to other safe place. In particular, in the territory of Central Asia, 5 million people are expected to become climate immigrants. In particular, the drying up of the Aral Sea of Uzbekistan is seriously affecting the living condition of the people of the region. In such conditions, the government of Uzbekistan is taking systematic measures to adapt and mitigate the consequences of climate change and to improve the living conditions of the district residents. Moreover, a number of conceptual documents have been adopted over the last 4 years, including the concept of environment protection till 2030, the strategy of the green economy, the strategy of the water sector. These main priorities of Uzbekistan for mitigating the effects of climate change defined in this document. They include reducing emission of pollutions into atmosphere, rational use of the water resource, and etc. Dear colleagues, Uzbekistan has also become an active participant in the global environmental agenda, including ratifying the UN Paris Climate Agreement. We have now developing our national strategy for low carbon development, and Uzbekistan is considering achieving carbon neutrality by 2015. In several international forums, last was the organization summit of the organization of the Turkish states in Samarkand. President of Uzbekistan, Mirziyoyev, initiatives several key aspects of the global agenda, in particular with regards to climate change issues. Mitigation of the consequences of climate change in the Republic and the adoption to them are largely facilitated by the national project, Yeşil Makan, Green Space. Every year, about 200 million trees planted in all over the region of the country to increase green space of the country from now 8% to 30%. Climate change has profound impacts on the wide variety of human rights, and including the rights to life, self-determination, development, food, health, water, and sanitation and housing. Today is 8th of December. It's the 30th anniversary of the adoption of the constitution in my country. You know, now Uzbekistan on the way of the constitutional reforms. Yeah, and we began these reforms for the first priority, principle of in the name of human honor and dignity. We are planning to introduce several changes in the Constitution. One of the key important issues of these changes, it's the first time environmental rights will be consolidated. And in new adoption of the Constitution, the right to healthy and favorable environment, as well as the information about its condition, as well as compensation for damage caused by the environmental offenses will be introduced as a constitutional norm. Behind this, the UN principles, SDG principle, leave no one behind, also enshrined as a constitution level, and including rights and interests of women, children, disabled persons, and migrants also be introduced in the Constitution. Dear colleagues, I have some proposals for consideration for exchange of views. First of all, we are fully support our colleagues to create working groups on scientific research. We have now in our office a scientific council which presents a PhD and DC degrees on human rights issue, and I am as a member of this scientific council also invite all young scientists from Turkey to cooperate all aspects of human rights, including aspect climate change, migration, and food security. Second, now in the world in the arena in international law, we can't have any legal binding documents regarding environmental rights, ecological rights, and that's why President Mirziyoyev has proposed at the 76th session of the UN General Assembly to adopt World Ecological Charter, which will include legal binding on ecological rights and issues on climate change. And we think it's time to conduct scientific research on these issues. Educational issues are very important issues in this regard. 2 days ago, in Samarkand, we have held international forum, global forum on human rights education. Very many participants all over the world, including our Turkish colleagues, participate, and I also thanks to our friend Dr. Professor Muharrem Kılıç for his excellent contribution on human rights education. And I think educational issues on ecological rights, on climate change will be also introduced to all spheres of educational aspects, including schools, universities, postgraduate studies, and we are also ready to cooperate in this field. And fourth, last but not least, is the engagement of business structure on climate change issue. Now, it's time to more actively integrate business structure on climate change issue, because in many countries, business has more power to change this sphere, including transnational companies, but they have no legal binding obligations. And I think one of the key results of our forum will be bringing recommendation about activity of the business structure to have obligation on climate change based on human rights approach. Thank you very much.
We would like to thank Mr. Tillabayev for the speech. Now it is time for Q&A. Are there any questions from the hall? Are there any participants willing to ask any questions? Please feel free to ask your questions. Please. Without a microphone, no interpretation. We cannot hear very well, but the question goes for Mr. Tilabave.
Situation in Uzbekistan, but I want to ask a question. How does this climate change actually affect the migration practices in Uzbekistan, including the internal migration as well as the external migration? And secondly, I want to ask you, when you consider the gender differences, how could you explain that the climate change affects the migration practices in terms of women and men?
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, please.
Thank you for your questions. You know, we have a big ecological problem in Uzbekistan as a Aral Sea tragedy. And we have about 2 million population near Aral Sea. And government adopted several programs, including improvement of water, sanitary, and other issues, and also adopted social economic measures to improve the lives of the people. But the ecological issue also affects on their traditional life, and one of the main priorities, as I said, in Uzbekistan, as creating space green line, Yaşıl Makam, and Uzbekistan paid great attention to increase green line place in the country, especially in the region of the Aral Sea. And second aspect, to improve status of the migrants, including internal migrants, to provide them social economic package for social benefits, and people from the region has received some economical benefits from the government if they decided to change their livelihoods to other regions, including Tashkent or other regions, and third issues. And you know, in the region of Aral Sea, we don't have enough companies or which was working on the level of the green economy. Now we have introduced new material and financial. Also, we invite other international donors, and we established with the United Nations fund, special fund for helping people of this region. And another problem in Uzbekistan, we have some problems on water issue. You know, in Central Asia, two main rivers, Amudarya and Sirdarya, which influence to the countries all over the region. And now we have conducted several negotiations with our neighboring countries to have adequate resources for water. And I think this water diplomacy also will be increasingly changed under the last 5 years. And I think the negotiations with neighboring countries on the merits of water issues will also help to increase climate change's effects on human rights also. Thank you.
Evet, başka bir sorumuz var mı?
Are there any other questions? I'm trying to examine the hall whether there are questions. Not. Okay. We do not have any further questions, so we can finalize this session. And I would like to thank the panelists for their speeches, and we would like to thank the participants for being here together with us. Thank you.
Konuşmacılarımıza ve
We would like to thank the panelists and the speakers. And now we would like to invite the President of Human Rights and Equality Institution of Turkey, Professor Dr. Muharrem Kılıç, for token of awards and providing the plates to the speakers. İngilizce kanalındayım. Ses veriyorum. İngilizce kanalından ses veriyorum. 1, 2, 3. Onay rica ediyorum. İngilizce kanalından ses veriyorum. Teşekkürler.
Değerli katılımcılar.
Distinguished participants, now we are going to have the second session, and we are going to talk about the effect of climate change and the food crisis on disadvantaged vulnerable groups. I would like to welcome you all to this session. And as the moderator, I would like to invite Professor Dr. Süheyla Suzan Gökalp to the floor. And I would like to invite Professor Dr. Fatma Arpacı, Associate Professor Dr. Sevan Erdoğan, Research Assistant Elif Kösesoy, and Dr. Nevenko Vranjes. I would like to invite all the speakers to the floor. First of all, apologies. I was together with the president and we were discussing a topic during lunch, so I came here late. Apologies. First of all, I would like to thank each and every one of you and also the organizing committee, especially the chairman of Human Rights and Equality Institution. I am from the faculty and I'm focusing on the environmental law, and of course we have been putting efforts all the time, and this is a very significant symposium for all of us, both for the human rights and also for the climate change, because there is the food crisis, climate change, and human rights for the topics of symposium. Why? Because recently these are the topics that we discuss most of the time and they are all together addressed. Thank you. And I would like to thank the participants. So this is the final session of the second day. That's why it's so good to see such a huge crowd. And all those papers, speeches are also very interesting. Of course, we are going to discuss more the climate change and the food crisis. And we know that climate change is number one and also on the agenda of our country. And for each sector, we know that we are going to see the impact and it is going to be discussed more and more. And of course, we have been discussing human rights, and because of the scarcity of water, resources, and with drought, we will discuss more and more. Because on the agenda of Turkey, we know that a couple of years, food crisis is also very important, and also there is the increase for the prices of all those products, and we always hear that. We know that compared to the income, the most expensive price for the product is in our country. So food crisis and also the prices for the food and also access to healthy food. And maybe in the future we are going to talk about access to healthy water. Now I'm late. Apologies once again. And now let's proceed with the speeches. The first speaker will be Professor Dr. Fatma Arpacı. Graduated from Ankara University in 1995 from the Faculty of Medical Sciences. Completed the master's degree and PhD in the same University and started to work in Gazi University as a research assistant. And in 2007 started to be working as an instructor, academician, and then associate professor, and then became a professor. Still working in the Faculty of Medical Sciences in Gazi University as a responsible author, and she has more than 150 national and international articles, and she has been working as the head of the department as of 2018. Yes, the floor is yours, madam. Microphone is not working. Microphone is off. Now, so climate change and the right to food of the elderly. And as the social service, of course, we meet with the institution, TİHEK, and we receive the support from the institution. And of course, all those events are related to our topics. So today I'm going to talk about the climate change and right to food of the elderly people. We know that there is the cause and effect association, and first there was the movement of all those continents, and then we realized that after the hegemony of human beings, we have seen the human factor on industry and some other sectors. So at the end of all those human being factors, activities, we know that the damage is given to various sectors, and this became a global threat. And we know that this is also related to agricultural sector and related to food. Climate change can have some natural processes internally, but there could also be some external factors. And once again, this could have the impact on the food security. And FAO also stated that in order to have an active and healthy life, first of all, there should be healthy, reliable, and nutrition-full food. So this is the definition. And in case of food insecurity or a crisis, then this will cause economical, social, political problems and a global crisis. And in order to cope with all those problems, we need to understand the negative impacts of the climate change on agriculture, and we need to mitigate those impacts. Yes, we are talking about human rights, and of course all those rights are indispensable rights for human beings as of birth. And in order to benefit from those rights, and in order not to eliminate the rights of others, there could be positive practices of the government. And also governments should respect to human rights, protect those rights, and in order to realize them, they should make some regulations. And therefore governments will be applying the international laws, and also they arrange and make the amendments in their constitutional law accordingly. And we know that related to the time factor, elderlies are in harmony together with internal and external factors, and there could be the decrease of the balance potential. I mean, we have different definitions for the elderly, but I like this one the most. Elderly is a physiological phenomena, but of course there is a weakening for the individual's physical and psychological power. And elderly can have various physical and psychological insufficiencies. And being elderly is also a critical period of time in terms of human rights. At the end of this life period, they should, of course, have the right to access the water, food. And of course, with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, we know that it is assumed that all the rights are accessible, but we know that there is no specific international agreement related to the rights of the elderly. And we know that there is also the UN General Assembly adopted document, which is a guideline related to the elderly. And So this is also declared in the General Assembly of the UN, and in number 1 we know that there is the independency principle, and according to this principle, elderly should have the nutrition, sufficient amount of housing, clothing, etc. And in order to benefit from health, they should have sufficient level of livelihood income. And of course, there should be different opportunities for them to enhance their capacities. And as much as possible, they should live in their own environment, living home or with their families. And of course, there are fundamental physiological needs, which is called nutrition and access to food. Access to food, water is a fundamental right for the elderly. In order to continue to survive, these products should be consumed naturally, and they should be available and easy for digestion. And there is also a separation between medication and food. There are some other concentrated products. The fundamental characteristics are this is required to be consumed until the end of life. The purpose of this security is to prevent and eliminate the poverty and lack of food. And of course, in order to see healthy nutrition, first of all, there should be economical power in order to buy all those products, and this regulation should be prepared. So this is a human right, right to food, right to nutrition. This is another step taken further. After Second World War, after the establishment of United Nations, there was the Declaration of Human Rights Universal, and then right to food was also involved in Article 11. And of course, in the law, we know that this is a fundamental right. In 1966, there is also another convention related to social economical rights, and in Article 11, we know that it is stated related to the right to food, and we still know that this is ratified by 163 countries, and this is also very significant. And we know that our country ratified in 2003, and it is disposed into the national law. So this is also placed as a fundamental right, and this is also protected legally. In our country, once again, and in some other countries, there are different framework agreements and legal regulations, and therefore we can see the transposition of this right to food to the national legal system. So during the elderly, there could be problems of nutrition and right to food, and all the evaluations should be carried out through the health indicators, gender equality, geographical condition, climate, income level, any kind of diseases, nutritional culture, accessibility to the healthcare services, and accessibility to some other alternatives. So all those reasons should also identify the problems of the elderly. And once again, there could be some social, cultural, eating habits, and also the physical health of elderly and quality of life. So these are all important in terms of well-being of the elderly individuals. The speaker is directly reading the document, and we are trying to do our best as the interpreters. So this nutritional habit can have some differences for each individual, and we need to consider that. A human being should be considered holistically, and all the needs should be fulfilled. And elderly people can have some psychological requirements, and they cannot be ignored. And in some cases, we know that the regular nutrition has a psychological effect, and we need to pay attention to that. And also environmental factors should also be paid attention. And regarding nutrition of the elderly, there is also another issue that I would like to emphasize on. Of course, I have a problem related to my presentation slides. That's why I could not use that PowerPoint slides. there could be some physical retardation until a specific age. And of course, there could be some lack of appetite. And physically, there could be some decrease in the taste particles on the tongue, and this could also be a factor. And together with aging in our country and globally, according to WHO World Health Organization, the initiation of being elderly is 65 years old. And as you know, this is the initiation of being retired in our country. So when we consider all those conditions, they should reach access to healthy and nutritional food. And of course, there is the decrease of income, and together with this decrease, this will have an impact on access to healthy food. And as we all know, healthy food are more expensive. And for the nutrition of elderly, these are the fundamental foods. But of course, we are not only talking about filling a stomach. We are talking about balanced, healthy, sufficient nutrition. So, as a fundamental human right, elderly should have balanced nutrition, and they have the access to sufficient level of healthy food. And of course, this is not possible all the time. And there could be some other indicators that we come across: access right to food and sufficient, healthy, balanced nutrition, right to food. So these are all must and fundamental rights. Without all those rights, all the rest of them cannot be fulfilled. And there are some constitutional provisions related to those issues indirectly. And in our constitution, actually, we do not have right to food. But right to food is also a part of right to living. And in order to have a healthy nutrition, first of all, we know that these are the consumers of the food. And as a fundamental right, this right to food should also be included in the constitutional laws. And this is a fundamental law, and it should be protected at the highest level. And right to food of the elderly is not including access to food, access to sufficient, appropriate, nutritional, healthy food for the elderly. I would like to finalize my presentation here. Thank you for attention. We would like to thank you, and we are going to receive all the questions at the end of this panel after all those speeches. Now, of course, you have used your time properly, but I just wanted to express some issues. Yes, right to food and right to healthy food is very significant, and we know that it is discussed nowadays. Access to food and access to healthy food for children. For example, nutrition at school. We know that there are some parents who are not able to put some food for the nutritional time at school. And also for the development of children, there should also be the contribution of the state. This is also on the agenda for one of the discussion topics. For the infants, for the children, access to healthy food is also very crucial. It's crucial for everyone. I mean, we need to have this food for the survival. And children are our future, and we know that there is the lack of height, and we know that there is also the issue of shorter height. So this is also the case for the disadvantaged, vulnerable groups, and this is also very significant for the survival. And the second speaker will be Associate Professor Dr. Seven Erdoğan, graduated from Boğaziçi University in 2007 from International Relations, and then completed her master's degree in METÜ and then in the Department of International Relations, and received PhD from Ankara University, and then in 2021 received the title of associate professor, and until 2012 she worked in different institutions, and as of 2012 she has been working in Recep Tayyip Erdoğan University as an academician, and as of 2021 head of the Department of International Relations. And she has, of course, various articles, papers published nationally, internationally, and she has also academic research and focusing on European Union. Moreover, recently she has also been focusing on the women studies and migration. Floor is yours, madam.
I am sorry, I have a bad voice today. Esteemed participants, my presentation will be about the gender mainstreaming strategy and climate change. And I will talk about the European Union's gender mainstreaming mechanism and its process regarding the climate change perspective of the EU. So I will first give you some background information about it. So the climate change and gender inequality are the two main challenges that are included on the agenda of the states. And the gender mainstream and gender inequality is as old as the humanity itself, and still we do not have any proper solution to that. When it comes to climate change is another global problem, and it also has an impact on the gender inequality as well. And also there's the global warming, and due to the global warming we have extreme weather events. So even though we have huge efforts to solve these two challenges, we are unable to solve those problems. And especially climate change is a problem that no only single country can solve it on its own. So it requires an international cooperation. And on the other hand, gender inequality is also a hot topic for every country. And for both challenges, there are solutions that we are seeking for. And for the United Nations, they are still trying to find a proper solution to that. And there are some norms, and those norms or the global targets needs to be reached on a global level as well. So climate change and its relation with the gender inequality, European Union actually, we cannot say that European Union established that relation, but until the end of the 1990s and in the beginning of 2000s, United Nations mentioned these two challenges as the main agenda topic, and they established the relation between these two. And I will actually explain how EU is actually addressing climate change and its relation with gender inequality. But first, let's discuss if this climate challenge is, what type of a challenge it is. Is it easy to solve? So EU trying to implement all the measures taken by the United Nations. And EU actually has a very good practices regarding the implementation of the United Nations precautions and measures. USA withdrew from the Kyoto Protocol, and they prefer not to be a part of the Paris Agreement. And therefore the EU countries has become the pioneering countries accepting this Kyoto Protocol and the Paris Agreement, and they have become the good practices, and the EU countries trying to shape the norms based on their own needs, and they also have cooperation networks and contact networks with the third parties so that they can disseminate those norms with the other countries. Therefore, EU countries actually has become the pioneering countries in combating the climate change. And environmental issues actually has considered as a part of the climate change as of 1990s. As the United Nations mentioned about the climate change, the EU countries started to discuss the environmental issues as a part of the climate change as well. The environmental issues are aiming to reduce the impact of the climate change, and secondly, the outcomes should be less destructive so that we can kind of adapt ourselves to the impacts of climate change. And we also have the climate diplomacy, and within that scope there are multinational cooperation. So this is what EU actually trying to do. Sometimes those actions and steps by EU may seem honest, but we can say that they mainly take those steps for only economic motivations. So this Green Deal and economic objectives of the EU cannot be disregarded here. And the EU actually mainly focusing on the development or the economic growth because they have concerns about that. So this is actually on the forefront regarding their actions. Therefore, EU has a specific objective like sustainable development and inclusive growth. And the gender inequalities started to be a part of this discussion as well. And as the Ukraine war has started, there is also an energy agenda of the EU because EU is dependent on the other countries in terms of energy generation. Therefore, this fact actually shapes their decisions regarding the climate change, and the smart uses and the renewable energy sources are becoming quite popular in EU because they have quite scarce sources of energy generation. And regarding the gender inequality, we can say that the climate change has a human rights dimension, and that's a fact. And to protect human rights, there might be some problems related to the climate change, and this can hinder the protection of human rights. And it also has some disadvantages regarding the gender inequality. For example, if you make a comparison between men and women, the women actually is more affected by climate change than men, and they have less sources to combat against the disadvantages because after the climate crisis, men can make use of their own sources or individual or personal sources, or thanks to the social roles attributed to men, they can easily fight against climate change or they can easily recover after the crisis. But it is becoming more difficult for the women because the voice of the women takes much more time to be heard by the society. Therefore, especially the poor countries, this gender inequality is quite obvious, and the conditions of women within the society are quite limited due to the social roles attributed to the women. And the women are responsible for feeding their families, and there are natural sources that go extinct due to the climate change. Therefore, women cannot generate any more resources to feed their own family. And in many of the studies, there's another issue. The women are more sensitive about the climate issues because women actually takes it more serious than men regarding the climate change issue. You may see around you, women are actually paying more effort for recycling process. Or women try to consume less so that their carbon footprint will be less. So I am sorry for men. Please do not be offended by what I am saying, but this is just the fact. So women are actually more sensitive, and therefore women's opinion should be included in the process so that they can be a part of the policy, and it will be a huge achievement. So what does mainstreaming mean, or what is the mainstreaming activities by the European Union? The Europe actually is quite sensitive about the gender equality indexes, and the Europe has the highest performance in terms of gender index. And there are many countries having the good level of performance. So Europe actually is a geography where there are less discrimination against the women. And when it comes to gender equality, they offer more opportunities or facilities to the women. And the gender equality is one of the main principles over which the European Union was established. But on the other hand, the EU actually has started some employment discussions, equal wage for equal job. Those were the main discussion point for gender equality in the beginning of 1990s. And in 1990s, there was the Beijing Women Conference. And at that conference, the mainstreaming concept was first started to be discussed. And then this gender mainstreaming concept was included in the United Nations agenda and the EU agenda as well. And what about this mainstreaming activity? So if we have a program and if we have a neutral, we plan it neutrally both for men and women, still the implementation of that problem may create some disadvantage for the women as well. So what can we do in this process? While organizing the policies or the programs, we should discuss what would be the outcomes of this program in terms of women. So we have to think about it in the very beginning of this planning, and therefore employment and training should go hand in hand. And there's a very wide range of mainstreaming studies in EU. For example, in Turkey, we have some arrangements, and there are a specific separate rule for women that can be quite normal, because we need sometimes the positive discrimination, because if you behave equally to men and women, in the practice, it may not mean the equality, because the women may still have disadvantage so that they cannot be fully equal with the men. Therefore, we need to give some more rights to women so that they can really be equal in practice with men. So what about the mainstreaming activities in EU? They actually want to create a kind of protection mechanism for any kind of threat in the mainstreaming. And when it comes to climate change, they have just started to discuss the mainstreaming issues in the context of climate change. So this is just the beginning, just a baby step. EU also try to convince themselves to have mainstreaming in the context of climate change. By 2010, they started to discuss this concept, and the EU Green Deal was agreed and signed by the EU countries. And after the Green Deal, this gender equality in the context of climate change has become more adopted. And there are some principles like leave no one behind or no discrimination, etc. And there are some advantages of this type of principles as well, because it means that women will have the equal opportunity. And on the other hand, when it comes to mainstreaming, there are two sides of the coin. So on one side, they are working on the gender equality, and the EU also working on the gender mainstreaming for climate change as well. So they refer to the climate change for their main mainstreaming studies. So the inequality between men and women is addressed in the context of climate change, because climate change deepens this discrimination or the inequalities, because women have become more poor, and there needs to be an intervention done so that there can be a complete gender equality. And EU also collect data for gender discrimination or gender inequality. And in policies, they have disaggregated data for men and women, and it facilitates their programs and implementation. And therefore, they have a quite good basis for mainstreaming for men and women. And in addition to that, EU has also provided humanitarian aid and development aid to the third countries, and especially the development assistance and humanitarian assistance are focusing on the mainstreaming. EU actually requests the countries who receive their assistance to become more mainstream in terms of gender equality. So there are some recommendations, or there are some conditional assistance by EU for gender equality. And finally, there is another issue. EU has becoming more challenged by this gender equality mainstreaming, because there's a fact that some countries, especially in the Eastern European countries, some people are against gender equality. And on one hand, EU has been taking further steps to provide gender equality, but recently they have been facing many challenges, actually. And finally, I would like to say that this gender inequality and the climate change are the two main issues. EU addressing both issues for their combating activities. And in order to have a proper solution, EU believes that climate change and gender inequality has to be addressed collectively. Therefore, they are focusing on the mainstreaming opportunities. And based on their studies, this mainstreaming studies are just the new beginning, and they will take more further steps. Thank you very much for listening to me. Thank you very much. Our speakers are quite using their times quite wisely. I would like to make a couple of comments after each presentation. And the climate justice is a new concept we have been discussing, and gender equality, or the disadvantaged group of the society, should have the equal human rights. These are the main topics, actually, that we are facing. And of course, the European Union has taken many steps in terms of improving the human rights. But when it comes to climate or environment, the European Union or the developed countries, they have actually been acting like two-faced, and they are becoming more hypocrites of the situation, because the developed countries do not make critical investment in their own country, and they use the African countries or the underdeveloped countries for these dangerous investments. And the labor force is cheap, and the sanctions, they are free from sanctions, they have to pay less tax, so they in their own countries, people enjoy their human rights, but they do not actually let the other people in Africa, for example, enjoy the same rights. For example, they do their studies and research about nuclear studies in Africa, not in their own country. So there is no justice and equality all around the world. But when it comes to climate injustice, the climate injustice actually is intensifying these injustice and unjust procedures for the poorer countries. And there are poor communities and disadvantaged groups already living in the poor or underdeveloped countries, and their condition has already been even worsened. Okay, we will hear the questions later, and I kindly invite the third speaker to the floor. And the third speaker is research assistant Elif Kösesoy. She studied her bachelor's degree in Ankara University, and she has completed the bachelor's degree in 2016, and she served the internship for 1 year in Istanbul, and then she studied this master's degree, and in 2019 she started to work in Ankara Yıldırım Beyazıt University, and she completed her master's degree on the juvenile studies, and now she is studying her doctorate thesis in the same university, and since 2018 she has been working as research assistant. The floor is yours. First of all, I would like to welcome all the participants with my due respect, and I also would like to thank TİHEK for organizing this symposium. So my topic actually is about the legal status and the protection of climate refugees. First, I will give you a definition and the conceptual definition, and then I will refer to the legal status of the climate refugees and the human rights of climate refugees, and then I will discuss a sustainable alternative, if it is possible or not, and I will also mention about the liabilities of the state. First of all, let me explain some of the concepts. And the most important concept is migration, environment, environmental problems, global warming, and climate change. Migration can be partial migration or permanent migration, and it means that people are moving from one place to another. Migration can be permanent or it can be seasonal. And this migration can be within the borders of the country, or it can be from one country to another country. For our topic, the most important difference is between the forced migration and the volunteer migration, because when it comes to climate change, it is not clear whether those people are migrating by force or by voluntarily. And my personal opinion is that this migration has a driven force actually, and the climate change is the main driven force for them. So they are not volunteer actually for migrating. So is there any relation between climate change and migration? So what was the reason of migration? Is climate change the only reason for migration, or is there any other alternative? Is there any other factor? For example, for migration, we can also talk about the environmental problems, and the climate change is the main problem for environmental problems. And the global warming and the climate change are the main environmental problems, and those are the driving force for the migration. And within this performance, within this framework, climate risks are actually increasing the tendency for migration. And considering the outcomes of climate change, it can be instant or it can be permanent over time. But in both cases, people actually have high risk to migrate from one place to another. But the climate change is not the only factor resulting in the migration. It would be a very reductionist approach if we say so. And from the legal perspective, if those individuals who are migrating because of the climate change, we still don't know what would be their legal status and how we are going to title them. And in this framework, there are various statuses for those refugees. For example, the refugee status, and in my project title, it is the protection of the climate refugees. So I use the term climate refugees, but I actually do not refer a legal status, but I only want to underline the complexity and the complications of this conceptual. So the climate refugee concept is not a legal concept. I just want to discuss this term. So can we call them as refugees if they are migrating because of the climate change? So I hereby want to refer to the Geneva Convention Article 1, and they are defining the refugee status. And there are quite limited options to become the refugee, and climate change is not included in this definition. And the UNHCR also defines refugee, and they also don't think that this climate change is included in this definition as well. And the UNHCR also don't think that we should call those people migrated because of the climate change as the climate refugees. And there are some island countries that will be buried underwater because of the global warming very soon, and they applied for refugee status, but their status was rejected by the court decision. And also, some of the courts have some decisions that those people can be considered as refugees within the framework of Geneva Convention, but these opinions are actually quite limited. The other legal status is the immigrant status. If you are an immigrant, it means that you voluntarily migrate from one place to another, but the climate refugees are not the volunteers. They have to migrate for various reasons. Therefore, it may not be correct to identify those people as immigrants. Because if we do so, they will not have sufficient protection. And we have displaced people within their own country, so they do not leave their country, but they are forced to change their location. And there are different titles for those people, but those people are actually not displaced within their country, but some people are displaced from their country to another. Therefore, this legal status will not cover climate refugees. And also, in the international legislation, there is no binding article. Therefore, they cannot have a full protection. Other status is temporary protection status. This temporary protection is mainly considered for the Syrian refugees, and we question if we can use the same legal status for climate refugees, but we cannot give proper protection to those people if they migrate for climate change. And also, the statelessness status can be also a discussion for those refugees. But if we identify them as the stateless people, this again will not give them a protection, and they can even be more exposed to the disadvantages as well. So in short, it is not possible to discuss any legal status for people who might have to migrate for climate change, and they do not have any proper protection, even though there are some international legal statuses identified for different types of migration. But the climate change is not included as a reason for migration, but it doesn't mean that these people will not be protected. So the main important issue is that those people actually should be protected based on human rights. So human rights-based protection should be offered to those people, because the climate change doesn't only mean an ecologic problems. Climate change also violates the human rights directly or indirectly. Therefore, the climate change and the global warming are actually the problems of human rights, and those people who are affected has to be protected because it is a human rights issue. So there's another reason why we should consider this problem as a human rights problem, because those countries who are contributing the most for the carbon emissions, etc., are actually paying the less price for those people, and the poorest countries are affected the most by the activities of the rich countries. Therefore, this is also an unjust and unequal situation, and we have to address the situation from a human rights-based approach. So when we talk about right-based approach, what do we mean by it? It is not actually focusing on the victims only. It is just the contrary. There needs to be programs and plans to protect the victims, but the main objective here is to protect the human rights and to establish the human rights. And when we talk about the human rights, first we have to identify which rights are mainly violated. I actually made some classifications, but I know that the violations of human rights are not only limited to those that I'm going to classify here. And all the human rights are interrelated with each other, and all human rights might be affected by the climate change. And in the beginning, right to live, actually, this is the main right that is affected by the climate change. And right to live is the main human rights regulated in the international conventions. And the climate change also impacts the right to live as well, especially for those people who are living in the risky regions. It creates a huge problem, and this is not only the problem of our day, but it is a future risk as well. And there is a relation between right to live and the climate change. In 2012, in Philippines, we had the Yolanda typhoon, and this typhoon happened because of the extreme weather events, and more than 7,000 people lost their lives. So the climate change actually violates the right to live, and the other right is the right to food. We discussed this right in detail, and we can say that regarding the right to food, climate change affects access to food, so that it affects the right to food in general. Especially developing and underdeveloped countries are facing the hunger crisis, and therefore they have quite critical condition for climate change. And right to food and for right to live, in addition to them, we have another right to access to clean water. And access to clean water is actually a fundamental right for all human. And regarding the climate change, it actually results in famine. And in those areas facing drought or famine, they have quite limited sources of water, and they almost have no access to water after some time, and it results in the water competition as well. And quite similarly, right to health is affected by climate change. And this right is also has a risk to be violated by the climate change. And the climate change related diseases will increase, and it will be a threat for the climate change as well. So climate change is also a threat for right to develop. And these violations of those fundamental human rights are an existential threat, actually. And the climate change is a huge risk factor, especially for the developing countries, because it violates the socioeconomic development rights of the developing countries. And the combating climate change is among the sustainable development goals of the United Nations. Another right is the right to housing. As we mentioned before, the sea levels are increasing, and those houses by the sea level will be threatened by that, especially Kiribati, Tuvalu, the Maldives. Those are the island states, and due to the climate change, they are facing a huge threat of housing. And within that framework, the migration has already started. And right to not be displaced is another human right. It is also related to climate change. This right is not directly regulated in the agreements. However, it means that the humans cannot be forced to live where they live actually. However, due to climate change, they have to change their living places, and they have to be displaced because of the climate change. So in this case, their safety, health, education, food rights are also violated. Another right is the right to shelter, actually, and the return ban is also important. And non-refoulement principle is important, and this principle also applies to climate refugees. There is the Toyota decision by the United Nations. Even though the committee doesn't use term climate refugee, still they accept the fact that those people shall not return to the areas which are affected by the climate change. And also right to shelter is another fundamental human right. Right to asylum is important, and those people shall seek for asylum due to the climate change. And finally, we know that climate change is really critical, especially for some disadvantaged groups like women and indigenous people, children, fishing men and women, and the small farmers, the villagers. Those are the main group who are negatively affected by the climate change, and those groups has to be protected as their human rights requirements. So once we embrace a right-based protection, can we have a sustainable alternative, and what would be the liabilities of the state? So the world, our globe is warming, and climate is changing. And therefore, we have to embrace human rights-based approaches. This can be the main sustainable alternative. In addition to that, those displaced people due to climate change has no certain legal status. Therefore, we have to develop a mechanism to protect those people. Both the United Nations and the national legislations should be developed. And as another alternative, a new system needs to be established, and the combating climate change should also respect human rights. And also within this scope, all stakeholders, all the world countries should participate in that mechanism, and they have to be accountable for their actions. And the governments, the states, should not address climate change as only an ecological problem, but climate change should be considered as a more problematic issue, referring to the other social aspects of the problem, and the climate policy has to be developed accordingly. That's all from my side. Thank you very much for listening to me, and by taking this opportunity, I would like to congratulate and celebrate your Human Rights Day. Thank you.
Çok teşekkürler.
Thank you. Right-based approach. And I have a question in my mind. Why there is no environment right? Microphone, please. Microphone, please. And the final speaker, Dr. Nevenko Vranjes. I hope you can spell your name rightly. And he received various scholarships, and he had the PhD, and he had the title of the associate professor, and also he worked on the political systems. And as of 2022, September 5th, he is also one of the ombudspersons, and I would like to give floor to him right now. Thank you.
Dear representatives of Ombudsman Institution of Republic of Turkey, dear representatives of different institutions and universities from Turkey, dear participants, ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure to have an opportunity to take part in the event as a panelist. I would like to commend our hosts for an excellent organization of this event. I would also like to stress my pleasure with the cooperation we have had so far with the Ombudsman Institution of the Republic of Turkey. As you may know, in addition to the good cooperation between our two institutions, our countries have a very rich cooperation in different fields, and we see Turkey as true friend. thank you very much for that. I'm going to talk, and actually the title of my presentation is Challenges to Environmental Protection and Role of Human Rights Ombudsperson of Bosnia and Herzegovina. So I'm going to talk about following questions. A little about background information on Bosnia and Herzegovina, about our institution of Human Rights Ombudsman of Bosnia and Herzegovina, environmental legal framework of Bosnia and Herzegovina, sources of environmental threats in Bosnia and Herzegovina, experience of institution of Human Rights Ombudsman of Bosnia and Herzegovina, and of course, on the end, some conclusions. As you know, our state has a very complex, and we, in such framework established in 1994, according to Dayton Peace Agreement, we have size about 51,000 square kilometers. We have population about 3.5 million. And we have several nations. We have Bosniaks, about 50%, Serbs, 30.8%, Croats, 15.4%, and the others, 3.7%. Our capital is Sarajevo, with 276 inhabitants. And major cities Banja Luka, Tuzla, Zenica, Mostar. We speak almost the same language, but we are talking about three languages: Bosnian, Croatian, and Serbian. Here you can see our coat of arms and our flag. We have very, very beautiful nature. You can see here on a river. It's maybe most beautiful river in Europe, and which flows on the western part of the BH. Also, we have very beautiful mountains. You can see here Vlašić mountain with altitude about 2,000 meters, and also it's a ski resort. Also, we have short coast, only 23 kilometers, and in this picture you can see our south part, our town Neum, also a tourist resort. We are very proud about our diversities, and here you can see Orthodox Church, you can see Catholic Church, you can see mosque, and you can see also temple or Jewish cathedral. We have very rich culture and historic heritage. Here you can see monuments from 12th century. About our institution, established in 2004 in its present form, has jurisdiction over entire territory of BH and considers cases of poor functioning of administration, judiciary, and all public authorities in BH. In addition to its general human rights protection regime, it also complies with following laws: Prohibition of Discrimination Act on Ministerial Government and Other Appointments, Freedom of Information Act. National preventive mechanism is being established as an additional competence. We have staff about 56 members with three ombudspersons. I am one of them. Also, our institution is in Banja Luka, headquartered in Banja Luka, second biggest city in the BH. Regional offices are located in Sarajevo, Mostar, Brčko, and field office is located in Livno. Our institution receives approximately 3,000 complaints per year. About environmental legal framework in BH, we have a state level of responsibility and entity level of responsibility. On the state level, we have a Genetically Modified Organisms Act, Animal Protection and Welfare Act, Plant Health Protection Act, Agriculture, Food and Rural Development Act, and some decisions, some strategies, some action plans. It's very important to say that an environmental legal framework mostly falls within competence of the entities, so it's a matter of entities, not state level. So, source of environmental threats in Bosnia and Herzegovina: air pollution is key problem in BH. it's estimated that more than 3,000 people die from air pollution every year. So it's European, in all Europe, estimation is about 8,000 people. Situation in the neighboring countries is not so better. Albania is the fourth most air polluted country in Europe, and it's followed by Montenegro, North Macedonia, and Serbia. All Western Balkan countries are the biggest small solid particle ejectors, PM2.5, whose concentration often exceeds the allowed limits up to 10 times. All harmful TPPs, TPP that means thermal power plants, are located in the Western Balkan, and the situation in BH is the worst. This primarily refers to the TPP Ugljevik, emitting more than 100,000 tons of SO2 per year. Healthcare costs that can be connected with air pollution amount to 21.5% of GDP in BH, while, example, Germany, this percentage amounts to 4.5% of GDP. Here you can see our city, Sarajevo. In the wintertime, Sarajevo is often the most polluted city in the world, unfortunately. Also, you can see sources of emission of SO2 in Europe, and Serbia in the first place, the second place Bosnia, North Macedonia, and so. Here you can see a map of TPP in Europe, and of course in BH we have Bosnia and Herzegovina actually has 5 coal-fired TPPs that are major source of pollution. The second is destruction and illegal deforestation. In 2019, around 73,000 of cubic meters of trees were destroyed or felled, with around 45,000 of cubic meters destroyed or felled by illegal deforestation. Also, BH is assessed to have more than 1,000 wild landfills, fortunately. Construction of nuclear waste storage at Trgovska Gora site in the neighboring Republic of Croatia, only 500 meters from the border with BH, poses potential problem. This puts 13,000 cities in BH and approximately 250,000 people at risk for the next 300 years. Una National Park in BH is at risk, drinking water springs are at risk. You can see here, Una River is only 500 meters from that position. They are going to build nuclear waste storage, but Croatia is member of the European Union, and we have some problems with this intention. According to the Paris Agreement, EU strategic vision is to have climate neutral economy by 2050. A rise in global temperature should not exceed 2 Celsius, and Western Balkan countries took over this vision through the adoption of the document entitled Green Agenda for the Western Balkans by signing in declaration in Sofia. In October 2021, leaders of the Western Balkan countries adopted the Green Agenda Action Plan in Slovenia, and the activity was planned to commence in 2022. BH also conducting campaigning direct to climate change, including decarbonization, energy and mobility, circular economy focusing on waste recycling, sustainable production and efficient rational use of resources, biodiversity aimed at protecting and restoring natural resources, combating air, water and soil pollution, sustainable food production chains and rural economy in general. EU is committed to providing financial support and technical assistance to countries most affected by the green economy transition, minimum 100 billion in the period 2021-2027. EC also adopted a comprehensive economic and investment plan for the Western Balkans, envisaging 9 billion for key green transition investments. European Union granted 339 million euros to the Western Balkans for 7 green agenda projects. Therefore, BH is planning to adopt the environmental strategy and action plan for the first time. Our experience, ombudsperson institution experience that citizens complains about legal and illegal landfill sites for litter, slag, ashes, and other waste. Pharmaceutical waste disposal also, illegal construction and unresolved stormwater issues, MHPP, that means mini hydro power plants construction, intention to construct a nuclear waste landfill in the neighboring Republic of Croatia. And our responses, while the landfills and uncontrolled waste disposal, recommendations sent to local self-governance units to continuously and intensively supervise the problematic sites and adopt adequate bylaws. Recommendations set to the competent ministries and Environment Protection Fund to assist low-level authorities to meet these standards. About industrial waste disposal, recommendations set to business and competent ministries to take measures with view to constructing landfills complying with the required standards and to enable citizens to enjoy the right to life in a healthy environment. About wastewater and unregulated sewer network, recommendations sent to local self-governance units to take required measures as matter of priority with view to finding a systematic solution to this issue across the municipality and to establish a system for managing, developing, protecting and using water resources. In environmental protection cases, our institutions use the legal possibility to open cases ex officio, mostly based on information from the media. One such example refers to the construction of mini hydropower plants on small river and the fact that local residents are opposed to that. Following the investigation, a recommendation was issued to the entity government which, inter alia, outlines the need to consider amending the legal framework and bylaws to determine the ecological flow and more efficient action of all authorities. Also, our institution has worked on cases of police authorities suppressing citizen protests staged because of the construction of MAGPPs and has examined the process for issuing permits by the competent public institutions. Let me conclude. BH also face issues related to violating the right to healthy environment, since the effects of these violations know no state boundaries. The key challenges we face are emission of harmful CO2 gases, while landfills, operations of thermal power plants that are major environmental polluters, and planned nuclear waste disposal in proximity to the border, Trgovska Gora. Total number of environmental protection complaints is 40 in the period of 2 years, is smaller compared to the other violations. Hence, our institution acted proactively opening cases ex officio and promotionally raising awareness of all stakeholders. IHRO recommendations sent to the competent authorities are, in the most cases, accepted, and we are proud of that. That's all from my side. Thank you very much for attention.
Thank you very much. Teşekkürler. We would like to thank you. So, legal regulations related to environment. So we have completed the presentations. And we would like to thank the panelists. And are there any questions for the panelists? I would like to receive the questions for our panelists, if there are any. İsmail Korhan, Yıldırım Beyazıt, PhD student, faculty law, and at the same time I am working as a researcher. As the foundation, of course we conduct different research, and my question will be to Ms. Elif. As of yesterday. Of course, we have been discussing climate change. We're talking about the climate change, the impact of climate change. And we know that there's also another significant impact, and this could also be an effect on the migration, the movement of all those individuals. And of course, in terms of economy, we know that Turkey is developing, and in terms of political manner, we know that it's also developing. And in terms of geopolitical condition, we know that it is exposed to migration. And of course, esteemed professors mentioned in the first session, there are some examples. For example, in Iran case, we don't know intentionally or not intentionally, but this is also causing the migration to another place. And so the first place will be Turkey to migrate. And once again, we know that there is drought, climate change, and there is also the effect. We have the case in Afghanistan, Pakistan, Bangladesh. We discussed Syria. Yes, we know all those cases. In such cases, so under the status of climate refugee, shall we consider such status, and will it be fair to have that? I just wanted to say fair because in 1951, for the Geneva Convention, this was related to the conditions, legal conditions of the refugees. So first, in the provision, it says that this burden, this load should be shared fairly by the countries. But we know that there are some other reports of IOM, and there is also the report of UNHCR. In such reports, we know that there is a higher amount of migration, but for the displacement and also settlement of all those migrants to a third country is lower. So the number of all those migrants are less. For this reason, according to this convention, of course, there should be the geographical condition. And, there could be this drawback geographically, and removing that drawback could also be intentionally. But for climate refugee, this could be the title for the status. And once again, Turkey will receive migration because of this climate change. Maybe under the title of climate refugee, if we are going to receive such higher amount of migration, and if this responsibility will not be shared by all the countries equally, then there will be another wave of migration. For this reason, first, there should be justice, and this responsibility, this burden should be shared by all countries, and all those countries should accept the migrants. This is not the case, but if we are going to have such status like climate refugee, then some of the countries will have higher burden on their shoulders. Thank you. Thank you for your question. All the time, we always express climate change, and climate change is not only the responsibility of a single country. On the contrary, this is a global issue, and this is the problem, and the solution should be globally. So if there is climate refugee, this could not be very clear, and then, of course, this burden will not be on the shoulders of a single country. This is the problem of all the world states. So if there will be the displacement, whatever the title will be, then there is the migration, and it will be compulsory, forced migration. And, of course, the solution will not be provided by a single country. As mentioned in the morning session, this should be shared. And in this framework, all those climate refugees mostly can come to Turkey. But this is not right. This is not right to say. I mean, it's not really right to say, okay, there will be higher amount of refugees, migrants. So at the end, we need to see this climate justice. And we need to address this issue all together with all the states according to the principle of distribution. Are there any other questions? Yes, please. Thank you, Velitaş. Turkish Bars Association, member of the Board of Fundamental Rights. My question is for Elif Hanım. So, climate, refugee, migrant, actually, especially, this is not accepted by UN as far as I know, but maybe we can interpret that as such. So, a person or a community will have the impact. And there could be fishery or there could be agriculture, and then they will be unable to perform those. And then before moving to another country, maybe they will stay in their own country and there will be the protection of their own state. And they're going to benefit from this protection and they try to move to another place. But if the state will not provide an environment for living, and if there should be the positive discrimination and this will not be performed by the state, then they are not going to be protected by their own state and they will decide on moving to another country. And also, according to the first article of Geneva Convention, we need to make an evaluation accordingly, and maybe we can understand this group as the refugees, and there will be a group of people and they're going to express, okay, we are not able to perform husbandry and we are not able to perform agricultural activity. Please help us. And after asking for some support, if the state will not provide any support, so are we going to make the evaluation according to the first article of the Geneva Convention? So with such an argument, can we state that yes, there is also the title of climate refugee? First of all, thank you. I'm going to try to answer. So, those individuals that are called climate refugees or migrants, they are affected from the climate change in their own environment and they change their place. But whether it is internally or externally displacement, it is difficult to identify that, especially for the island states. After the elevation of the sea level, then we know that Tuvalu, Kiribati, so all those island states, if they are going to be underwater, I mean, this is the risk. And those people who are living here will move and they will be the migrants to New Zealand or Australia. So this can be internally and externally. If they are going to migrate internally, of course, the responsibility will be on the shoulders of the state. As we mentioned previously, so we know that there are some states contributing the least for the climate change, but the burden is the most for them. We also know that all those people, internally displaced people, they will have some burden, but maybe we can find a solution at international level. When we consider the Geneva Convention, there are some limited reasons to become a refugee, and there is also the majority opinion that these limitations cannot be increased. And another minority opinion is that there is also the association with the climate change, and it is stated that all those people can also be the refugees and they can also benefit from the Convention of Geneva. And within the scope of international law, they can ask for protection. But according to the decisions of UN Human Rights Committee, actually we realize that this acceptance is not adapted. I mean, unfortunately, we cannot call them refugees. Therefore, maybe there could be another convention and the legal status of all those climate refugees can be defined, or there could be some legal different tools and there could be a different legal status for all those people. So this will be my answer for your question. Thank you. Thank you. Are there any other further questions? I think no. Okay. If not, thank you very much for being here together with us. We would like to thank TİHEK, Human Rights and Equality Institution of Turkey. Once again, thank you, dear participants and esteemed panelists. Once again, we would like to thank esteemed speakers, valuable academicians. Have a nice evening. Thank you.
Konuşmacılarımıza ve
We would like to thank the panelists and the moderator, the chairperson. And now we would like to invite the president, deputy presidents of Human Rights and Equality Institution, Nimet Özkaya and Yılmaz Bölükbaşı, to the stage for providing the plates and token of awards. Thank you.